we are seeing an increase in cases across the reservation. And as you mentioned, we span across North and South Dakota. And so we rely heavily on, good leadership from both states, and their decisions impact our communities heavily.
Yeah, I got to imagine that even if the reservation is distinct in terms of its governing structure and its sovereignty, it is, inevitably intermingled with the rates of community transmission in the folks around you.
Exactly. We rely on outside communities for shopping. People work off the reservation. We have off-reservation people that come onto the reservation to work in our schools and our healthcare system. So we're very much intertwined with those communities. I think my frustrations as a public health professional is that we really need leadership to be following the science and to be following the expert guidance on how community members can do their part in addressing the spread. And we've just not been effective at doing that.
Let me ask you this. In New York in March and April, which was basically the worst outbreak in the world at that point, and probably still, maybe city in Ecuador here or Brazil here and there, but at that point the worst. It got really bad. People were inside. They heard the wailing sound of sirens all the time. 1 out of every 400 New Yorkers died. And it traumatized people. I mean, they were traumatized. They knew people that got sick. They knew people that died. And they were like, this is awful. What is the social life world experience of this pandemic on your reservation and in those states now as the numbers per capita head towards New York levels?
Well, I think it varies. We have, especially in North and South Dakota, we know that there has been major resistance to, wearing face masks. There's been a debate about their effectiveness and whether they're, even work, and suggestions that maybe they're even harmful to our health. And so we have that attitude, but we also have, I think within our reservation communities, we do have people that are taking this virus seriously. They know that we are losing precious lives. They know that it's important for them to do their part to reduce the spread, and that has been what we've focused on when we're educating our communities. It's about doing things for the greater good. It's about making good choices, being a good relative, doing everything that we can to make sure that our communities stay safe and healthy, but we don't see that across the 2 states that we share territory with.
What is the healthcare capacity that your tribe and reservation has?
So we do have an Indian Health Service facility. It is a 12-bed hospital, but we definitely have reached capacity several times during the pandemic, and we rely heavily on outside healthcare facilities to meet those higher level of care needs for our patients. And so when we talk about the healthcare capacity across North and South Dakota, that is scary for us too, because we rely on those healthcare facilities, and when their capacity is dwindling, we know that we're going to have to be searching farther and farther for our community members to have the level of care that they need. And we're disproportionately impacted by this virus. We have, higher rates of the pre-existing conditions that put us at risk of developing complications, and so this hits us hard. When our people are getting sick, they're getting really sick, and they're needing those higher levels of care. All
right, Tasha Peltier, who works in the Standing Sioux Tribe there in North and South Dakota, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
That is all in this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now with Ali Velshi in for Rachel. Good evening, Ali.
Have to be reasonable and fair, or they won't.
They do.
Professor, great to see you. That's right. Thanks so much. We're out of time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for trusting us. Sean Hannity, right now.
All right, Tucker, thank you, and welcome to Hannity. We begin with this Fox News alert. All right, tonight the deadline for Georgia's recount is less than 3 hours away. Still at this hour, voters in the Peach State have more questions than answers, and thousands of uncounted ballots, most of which were cast for President Trump. They've just been turning up all week. Fayette County, 2,755 ballots just unearthed. Another 284 were discovered in Walton County. This all in addition to the 2,600 uncounted ballots in Floyd County that were discovered just a couple of days ago. If you're keeping track, that's over 5,600 uncounted votes located in the past week. 2 weeks later. Now, in a state with a razor-thin margin of now just over 12,000, That is a serious problem. How is one to have faith, trust, confidence in our election system? But the issues in Georgia don't end there. One county, a purported human error during the recount, might have given thousands of extra votes to Joe Biden, if not for one extremely attentive observer. According to Georgia's Republican Party chairman, it was a 9,000 vote discrepancy that was signed off by two officials in DeKalb County, Georgia, and would not have been discovered but for the Republican observer. Well, we didn't have observers at most of the states whose legal statutory language says you can have one. Yet another perfect example why election observers are critical if we want free and fair elections in this country. But in almost every state where the law guarantees partisan observers the right to watch the vote start to finish and the vote count, the law was never followed. State after state, we saw partisan observers blocked from performing their important legal duty and their right to do.
Inactive during a pandemic, and now that Operation Warp Speed, bravo, it worked. Putting the money in was worth the risk. We have one, maybe two vaccines. One came from the operation, one didn't. But now we need to figure out how to distribute it. You know it won't be on your watch, and you're not going to help the people who will have to make it happen, and you think you're about saving lives? You're going to kill more people by facilitating these tantrums. That's what they are. It's a revenge blockade of a transition. Biden's victory is about to be further solidified. Nothing else is going to happen. Georgia is on the cusp of announcing its election audit results. And the Secretary of State there, a Republican, says it will confirm Biden's win. We'll see. Trump team lawsuits being laughed out of court. They're in their third iteration in Pennsylvania of the same tripe. A federal judge actually canceled an evidentiary hearing. They said, you don't even have enough proof to argue if there's proof. Rudy Giuliani appeared in court yesterday, had no evidence of the fraud allegation. He literally attached news articles as proof. And when pushed, said, this is not a fraud suit. Then what is it? The play is obvious. It's not about justice. It's about just us, the Trumpers, and getting enough political stink to create pressure to hope that a state legislature that is Republican dominated will steal the vote and give it to hand-picked electors to be faithless and vote for Trump anyway. That's their play. Just think about wanting to do that and how heinous that is as even a suggestion with no proof to motivate it except proof of your own perfidy, that you have no faith in your own duty. That's the reality that we're watching. Some of the last remaining stimulus programs for the unemployed during this pandemic, made unemployed by the pandemic, are set to expire by the end of next month. You see any action about that? You see anything? The election is over, but the fight of our lives is only intensifying. And the only attention we're seeing from those in power on the right is to forward Trump's endless vanity. Let's bring in David Gregory and Michael Smirkanis. Gentlemen, thank you. Smirk, on the legal side.
Breaking overnight, American democracy. Actually, it didn't break, but it wasn't for lack of trying from President Trump. A dizzying 12-hour period where the president assaulted dedicated civil servants while simultaneously trying to undermine the outcome of an election.
The losers in the Republican leadership should take a page and don't lecture us anymore about patriotism or about putting country over party, or rather putting party over country, which is what they did.
I never thought I'd see a day where you saw pretty much an entire party in this country refuse to accept election results. This is like a sick, childish fantasy that these Republicans, are basically tiptoeing around Donald Trump.
We could just replay their 4 years of craziness, and are they that out of touch with who they really are? Fake, phony, feigned, selective outrage. Pretty much something to behold. Sean Davis, Federalist, writes on Twitter, Democrats, the media, accused George W. Bush of stealing the election that he was involved in 2000. Some spread a conspiracy theory that Bush was involved in 9/11. They accused Bush of intentionally lying about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, claiming electronic voting machines stole the election for Bush in 2004. That was Democrats. Then, of course, they spread the hoax that President Trump was a Russian agent. They spread those lies and slander for, what, 3 straight years. Justice Kavanaugh pretty much called a rapist and everything in between. They said violent riots this summer were peaceful. Remember the banner from fake news CNN? Fiery, but mostly peaceful protests. That was the background. Take a look at that. They accused Republicans, especially President Trump, Nazis. You know the names they say. And let me add, by the way, Stacey Abrams in Georgia still has not conceded her gubernatorial race in Georgia from 2018, loved by the Democrats and the media. Now, the president wants to take a few weeks, count every legal vote, investigate every claim of fraud and abuse, and the media acts like the world is ending.
In Georgia since 1992. And so now that Georgia's electoral votes are officially out of their grasp, the president and his Republican allies are ripping a page out of the playbook that they've been running in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. With the control of the Senate hanging in the balance, Republicans are now laser focused on blue, mostly black, diverse voting pockets of Georgia to find new ways of disenfranchising Democratic voters in the newly turned blue southern states. So as we embark on this bumpy, fraught final lap of the 2020 election, keep your guard up and your eyes open. Closing out this chapter of history will indeed be remembered as one of man's hitherto unattainable goals. So, channel Roger Bannister. He was tired at the end, but he knew that he would just about make it. I want to bring someone into this conversation who's going to help Democrats in the final leg of this race to bring them over the finish line. Stacey Abrams ran for governor in Georgia in 2018. If it were not for a coordinated Republican effort to suppress Democratic votes in Georgia, Stacey Abrams said she would be governor today. But her race was not in vain. The grassroots work that she did in Georgia during and after her campaign helped cement the right to vote for everyone in Georgia to stop what happened to her from ever happening again. It is this woman's work that has been credited with helping Joe Biden win the state of Georgia this year. Joining me now, Stacey Abrams, the former Georgia gubernatorial candidate and the founder of Fair Fight Action. Ms. Abrams, good to see you and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about the strategy heading into these 2 runoffs. There's nothing to celebrate yet in Georgia. We've got the presidential election largely behind us, but for a certification and an audit issue. But there are 2 very serious Senate races that are going to happen on January 5th. What's the strategy?
Well, first, we have to celebrate what we accomplished in November because that's one of the reasons we have a pathway in January. We have to remind voters that they can start again with absentee ballots. We won absentee ballots in the November election. We can win it again in January. But we also have to remind voters what the Senate does and why it's so critical that Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock represent the state of Georgia and help determine the future of our country. We know that this...
In terms of his words and deeds, he's going to come out unscathed and looking like a victim. So didn't you answer your own question? He doesn't go away. The base does stay with him, and he may be the man going into 2024 unless he wants to make it his daughter.
But I go back to David's point, right, which is to say in any other climate, at any other time, that this would be a very interesting intellectual argument. But we're dealing with a pandemic, and I have to believe that people are taking a look at this and saying there are no events on his calendar. His activities, as far as we understand them, are to sit there and tweet grievances. It's like Festivus all day long, instead of handing over the football to the Biden administration, getting ready for vaccine distribution. That death count, I would think, is going to be an albatross.
Festivus, Seinfeld reference, except instead of it being a holiday for the rest of us, it's Festivus. He celebrates and he screws the rest of us. David, your take.
Well, I think Republicans would like to be free of Trump, and they can't. They're too afraid politically because of what Michael's saying, what I'm saying, and you're saying, which is he's a force. Whether he runs again, even outside of the White House, everything goes through him because he's got this base of support and he's trying to build this idea that somehow he was unfairly deposed, for which there is no evidence. But I think that is the question, because yes, Republicans would like to be free of Trump, but they recognize that Trumpism and that impact on the Republican Party is durable. He's actually changed the party. And that's what populists do. And how that runs its course, we don't know. But that's the big challenge for the party. And it's an additional challenge for Biden because people rejected Trump at some level. They did not stand squarely behind the Democratic Party. And that's going to be hanging over Biden as he tries to lead.
After Turkey Day, do you think Biden needs to knuckle up and become fighting Joe Biden again and say enough of this? I want in.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think he's got it calibrated. I think he's done a good job so far. I think he's had a pretty good feel for how to approach Trump throughout this season, the election season, and now the post-election season. He's acting like a president. He's not just trying to get in the ring with the guy. He's just putting pressure on, on. More Republicans in their own feeble way are coming around. But yeah, I think, a couple more weeks and they're going to have to amp it up. And again, it'll be in the context of the virus.
But that's what I'm saying, is that, Michael, yeah. I totally agree with everything that David says. That's why I call you guys on the phone so much to figure out what to say on my show. What I'm saying, though, is we've watched the GOP become the Trump party. We've watched them willingly be complicit in ignoring the pandemic and doing the minimum. And now, the idea that David says some are coming around, I don't see it. And Biden is a commander-in-chief elect during a pandemic. Doesn't that give him the mandate, the wherewithal to say, look, we can't wait for him to get over it. These tantrums are killing the rest of us. Get out of the way.
I think he has no choice but to do exactly that. But in terms of whether more Republicans will break fold and bring pressure to bear on the White House, I think Republicans are mindful of the fact that Donald Trump increased his raw number of votes as compared to 4 years ago. They gained seats in the House. Arguably, we don't know till January 5th. The Senate remains in Republican hands. The gubernatorial mansion in Montana shifted to the R's, and more state legislatures were won by Republicans. So it's easy to look at the pandemic and for us to say this is god-awful, but there's a political calculus where they are deathly afraid of Trump because of the control that he exerts on the party.
They wound up doing that well, despite the pandemic. Now, a little bit of that is because the Democrats have to learn that in this new binary world of left and right, they have their own concerns about fringe, and people have concerns about that. But David, think of that. If we did this on paper, and you and I wasted a lot of Italian food watching this election in 2016 and watching everything we thought might happen, and then some. You did this during a pandemic. You won seats against the Democrats. You probably hold on to the Senate, and you got more votes than you did in 2016. Why change now?
Right, and that's the key point. We can't forget, even though people disapproved overall of his handling of the virus, there's still a lot of people who look up and say, because people nonsensically have created masks as some kind of politically divisive issue. They say, look, we're getting a vaccine faster than ever. This could have happened to anybody. And yeah, this is bad, and it's bad all over the world. But the real problem today is what Dr. Fauci talks about. You need a uniform standard. The virus is going crazy around the country. And you have a state-by-state approach. That's not what you need. The virus travels. There's got to be a uniform approach. That's what's been lost. And that's the easy thing for Republicans to fall back on now, saying, well, the states have their own plans. And you see what's happening in your city, in New York today, over the schools. I mean, it's really, really messy. And that's why everybody's got to be on board. The idea that Biden can't talk to Fauci, I mean, there's enough people in the country who hear that who say, that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's not safe.
Smirk, last word.
Last word is, as the dust settles, this was a referendum on Donald Trump. He lost that referendum, but voters were not prepared to hand a blank check to Joe Biden and the Democrats.
That's a good last word. Dave?
15 days after the election. So Ranking Member Comer and I today, first call for an investigation. We sent a letter to Mr. Nadler and Chairwoman Maloney. Why don't you guys investigate? The committees aren't even meeting this week. Why not? Why not look into this? So that to me is the fundamental question. These same Democrats who told us that the rioters and the looters all summer long were peaceful protesters are now the same ones telling us we can trust the vote when everything shows all the problems. Kaylee just went through them all. Let's look at all that information. And when it comes to Tony Bobolinsky and the Hunter Biden story, Bill Barr should name a special counsel. It's that simple. Name a special counsel and look into that situation.
Joe? Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, I would suggest that the president isn't fighting for his own political fortunes in these legal battles. He's fighting for the rest of us. We all deserve elections where we don't have people voting in more than one state. We don't have people voting after they've changed their address. And the scale is now reaching some significance. In Georgia, these mistakes aren't in the tens or hundreds of votes. They're in the thousands of votes. Maybe we ought to put the people who ran Operation Warp Speed in charge of counting the ballots in Georgia, and they'd be able to get us a result by now. But here's the thing, Sean. If we can flip Georgia by showing that there was not accurate counting there, then I think it pulls back the whole veneer that the media and others have tried to put on these mail-in ballots.
Have you been watching this Secretary of State? That Secretary of State in Georgia is more interested in lying and attacking Lindsey Graham and Doug Collins than he is about the thousands and thousands of votes we're finding a couple of weeks after the election. And the governor,
and this is just
who should be calling us. What's that?
Yeah, like this is just the beginning of that audit. It's not as if they have completed a review and it's 9,000 ballots in the discrepancy category. That's just DeKalb County. So when you get to moving well beyond that, we have an expectation that there could be other errors that literally could flip the outcome in Georgia. And once Georgia flips, we got a lot of questions about Pennsylvania, whether it's the spike in 90-year-olds, more of them registering in the last year to vote than in the prior 4 years combined, including 2 election years. I think that when we really dig into the circumstantial data and in the real data, we'll find out that there was ballot laundering going on here. And when you pair that with the lack of observation, it really raises more questions. Observation of ballots should not be a game of hide and seek, right? You shouldn't have to be, 100 feet away trying to engage in a signature match. This ought to be precise and it ought to be clear, and we're getting anything from precision and clarity out of Georgia and Pennsylvania in particular right now.
Now, Florida had problems, but boy, Ron DeSantis straightened them all out, and it went perfectly. Same with Ohio. Jim Jordan, so what are the next steps here? I mean, look at what they're trying to do in Wisconsin. Yeah, let's change the law now, just before we do all of this investigation, right?
Yeah, the main thing is let the process work out. We got 26 days, Sean, until the Electoral College has to meet. That is enough time for us to look what happens see what happens in the legal cases, see what happens with the recounts, with the audits. And in Georgia, you've had 3 counties. There are 156 other counties in the state of Georgia. You got a Secretary of State that obviously doesn't know what he's doing. Frankly, I think Doug Collins should challenge the Secretary of State and run against him in 2 years. I think that would be better for the state of Georgia and better for the whole country. So let's let the process play out. Let's let the law, the process, and the Constitution work exactly like it's supposed to. Let's get to the bottom of all this, as Matt said, for the good of the country, for the good of this election, for the good of the United States of America. That's what we got to focus on.
But why?
Pain. Give up. The couch is calling. I say it.
And you'll ever own. Its finish lasts 10 times longer. Blue Diamond is dishwasher safe and toxin free.
This is the strongest pan I've ever owned.
In all 50 states. And as we know, what follows a surge in cases is a surge in hospitalizations and deaths. But there is a glimmer of hope ahead of us. Pfizer announced today that its coronavirus vaccine, the one that people were already excited about, is now considered 95% effective with no serious side effects. The company plans to apply for emergency use authorization from the FDA, quote, within days. So there is hope that the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine will be available soon. But even when the vaccines are available, we'll need a way to distribute and administer them, and a plan to do so. And that requires cooperation and coordination within the federal government and between the federal and state governments. But the Trump administration has been stonewalling the Biden transition, withholding crucial coronavirus information from the Biden team. During a vital roundtable with frontline workers today, President-elect Joe Biden drilled down on the ramifications of a delayed transition on vaccine distribution.
And there's a whole lot of things that we just don't have available to us, which unless it's made available soon, we're going to be behind by weeks or months being able to put together the whole initiative relating to the biggest promise we have, with 2 drug companies coming along and finding 95% effectiveness, efficiency in the vaccines, which is an enormous promise. So I just want to tell you that that's the only slowdown right now that we have.
Biden shared those concerns with a panel that included a firefighter, an ICU nurse, a school nurse, and a home health care worker, who in turn explained to him their needs and their frustrations with the federal virus response.
I think so much of the problem is that there's been no federal plan, no leadership, and it's really hurt us. Our health department here in Cleveland really is bare bones. It's still bare bones. Our contact tracers are working 24/7, but they're about 4 days out. They're about 4 days from contacting a positive case.
We're not being given the protection that we need. We need to have optimal PPE for all staff to prevent airborne and droplet transmissions. We need testing of our workers and patients and contact tracing and notification of exposure for healthcare workers. Do you know that I have not been tested yet, and I have been on the front lines in the ICU since February?
You're kidding me.
That was the president-elect off camera, incredulously trying to verify what he had just heard. Sadly, none of those frontline workers were kidding. We're 8 months into this pandemic, 8 months in, and our frontline healthcare workers are still sounding the alarm about the lack of personal protective equipment, the lack of testing and contact tracing, all of which are basic containment measures that we have heard about repeatedly for 8 months. Right from the beginning, the experts said testing and contact tracing in particular are key ingredients to slowing the virus and reversing the surge that we are seeing nationwide now. But in some places, the virus is so bad that contact tracing is next to impossible. Places like North Dakota, which currently has the highest COVID mortality rate in the world. One contact tracer in North Dakota wrote in an op-ed in the Washington Post describing how drastically her work as a contact tracer has changed since the virus began to overwhelm the state. She explains, quote, "Things got so bad so fast that we surrendered one of our key weapons against the pandemic. Test and trace went by the wayside. Even if we had enough staff to call up everyone's workplace and contact, there are so many new infections that it wouldn't be as effective. At this point, the government has given up on following the virus's path through the state. All we can do is notify people as quickly as possible that they have the virus." She continues, quote, "What began as a 15-hour-a-week position is now a round-the-clock job. My phone buzzes constantly with calls and texts from my cases, reporting symptoms and asking questions. Legally, I'm not allowed to give medical advice, but I direct them to the right services and sources of information. Mostly, I just try to listen. Some people, when they are sick and in isolation, just want to talk to someone so they don't feel so alone. When you get down to it, listening to a person's worries is both the least I can do and the most I can do to help," which is awful to think about. Joining me now is Kylie Langang, a North Dakota contact tracer and senior nursing student at the University of North Dakota. Kylie, thank you for joining us. Thank you for what you do. There are people like you, thousands of them across America, who we don't know unless the phone rings. And because I travel, my phone does ring from contact tracers. And they're just trying to gather some basic information from me that get put into a system that is supposed to give us a map, to sort of tell us, to give us advance notice of what's going on, to be able to warn people who've been in contact with me, and to give authorities some sense of where this virus is going. You said that at some point North Dakota kind of had to abandon the idea that they're actually tracing this virus.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much that we ended up giving up. It was more of we couldn't keep up with it. People were either having contact lists of maybe only 3 people to like 50 different people in one place. It became a necessity of it's more important to contact the cases that are positive and spreading than it was to contact every single contact at that point.
Kaylee, talk to me about what good contact tracing looks like. How's it supposed to go down?
Yeah, so good contact tracing and what we had done originally is we would be assigned cases. Once they test positive, we usually call them. They would already know that they were positive through the clinic or the testing site. And then we would get all of their demographic information, health and medical history, stuff that was more important. And you'd move on to more of where have you worked, where have you been, who have you been around, and putting all of those places into the system. Now, unfortunately, again, that's not something that we can do.
And if you were able to do what you originally designed, the way it was originally designed, how effective is that? What's the goal there, that you can figure out everywhere this person has been and with whom they've been in contact, and then what? Try and find all those other people?
Yeah, so the whole thing is to, I would get a list of everybody that you've been around, and then I would contact them individually and say, you have been exposed to COVID-19, you need to isolate for 14 days, and then they would be inputted into the system and get monitored themselves as well.
Talk to me about how this goes. Obviously, each one of these calls is different. You don't have to divulge anything that you're not allowed to divulge, but generally speaking, what happens when you call someone? How do they respond to you?
Yeah, so now it's usually kind of like it was said in that article. People are almost very resigned about it. It's like, of course it was, I thought so. So it's usually just starts with, hi, is this so-and-so? And have you been made aware of your test results? And then you get their date of birth, confirm who they are, and just start talking to them. I like to form a relationship with people more so maybe than others, but it's a scary time, especially if it's your whole family or it's an older person. It's scary. So it's offering all of that, getting their information, seeing if they've worked, letting them know this was when you were infectious, this is who you need to notify. We give need to isolate letters so they can provide that to their employers. And then I usually just leave my personal contact information for them to reach out if they ever need anything.
And you are still running into some people who don't take this seriously.
Yeah, sadly we are. So there are still a good amount. I would say it's less now, but originally, yes, it was a lot of, well, this is political, this is a hoax, or, I mean, it's not happening in North Dakota. It's not needed here, that's not true. So thankfully now it's kind of toned down and people are more serious about it, but we're still seeing huge numbers of cases and hospitalizations, and yeah, it's going downhill.
Kayla, you have one of the most important jobs in America, and I will say that 6 months ago or 8 months ago, I didn't even know such a job existed. I didn't know what this was all about. We heard these terms. We were told contact tracing is going to be the most important thing. It's an honor to speak to you. Thank you. History will smile upon you and the thousands of others across America who are doing this important work. Kaylee Langang is a North Dakota contact tracer and a senior nursing student at the University of North Dakota. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Well, you are likely to
and make yours a winter slumberland.
Did the art get out the vote operation using lots of Georgians and plenty of volunteers coming in from outside the state. And then finally, the argument that Senator Perdue laid out. The only way to rein in the excesses of a Democratic White House and the Democratic House of Representatives is to have a Republican Senate. He put it right. This is the last line of defense for conservative values. If we don't have a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate, then they're going to have, as you said earlier, a clear path to this nutty agenda. Get rid of the 60-vote rule and pass every nutty nostrum and lock in a governing Democratic left majority for decades to come. So money, marbles, and chalk, as we say in Texas.
Two things. You got to give Stacey Abrams credit. She has built up a powerful mail-in ballot, force for the Democrats. The Republicans ready to match that, number one. Number two, how are Georgians going to react to, we just found, 6,000 ballots this week, and the mess that has been created down there? I think a lot of them are probably ticked off. Do they feel disenfranchised and want to throw their hands up, or are they motivated they can't get to the polls soon enough?
Well, the Republicans are going to build a big get-out-the-vote machine. They briefed me on it. They've already begun. People started.
As big as Stacey Abrams, because she's got over 600,000 are ready to go.
Well, she may have, but the Republicans are heading for bigger numbers, and I've got to tell you, they got to do some catch-up because she's been spending. What's interesting is tax-free dollars. She's been doing political work with tax-free dollars for years. And I think in violation of the law, but she's now taken this supposedly nonpartisan voter registration, get out the vote effort and put it into a partisan context. So there are all kinds of problems with that. But the Republicans are going to have a good machine to get out the vote. But you put your finger on it. How do people feel? Are people going to say, you know what, I voted for Donald Trump, he didn't win re-election, he didn't carry our state, I'm staying home? Or do they say, I voted for Donald Trump because I believed in a conservative agenda and I want that agenda advanced, I don't want it demolished, I don't want what he has done in office to be, the tax cuts, the policies put in place, the conservative judges, I don't want that wiped out, and I'm going to turn out and vote. And that's going to be the message that David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are going to have to get across here in the next 40 some odd days, 49 days, 47 days.
I'm not trying to be
insulting.
insulting.
Have to get them across.
Do they have the right team in place? And I'm asking honestly, because there's no time to, play around here. Do they have our best people behind the scenes to do the best ads, the best ability to get mail-in votes and build up that base and get people to the polls? Are you confident?
You know what? One of the things that happened is they both took a look at their operations and said, you know what, we did good, but we can do better. And they brought new people in. They brought their teams together. There are a bunch of adults down there, which I really like. You get in a situation like this, and a lot of times there's so much pressure and there's so much controversy, and people start going up against each other, and sharp elbows start going, and then you start seeing it being leaked to the press. This guy's an idiot, that guy's not, this person's really good, that person's not. None of that. Instead, what you're seeing is a group of adults who say, you know what, we were in a tough fight in November. We're going to be in a bigger fight in January. We need help. And so they brought people in who have the confidence not only of the candidates but of their colleagues. And I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to be a hard fight, but I think we can prevail.
You got Thanksgiving coming, you got Christmas week, you got New Year's week, and then you come back on Monday, you vote on Tuesday. That's a challenge.
Start voting. Yeah, you're right. But better than that, start voting now by mail.
Agreed.
And when the early voting period gets, get to the polls. Because the last thing we want is an ice storm on January 5th in North Georgia and all those good Republican voters not able to get to the polls. So get your mail ballot, send it in immediately, go to the polls when they open up early, get your vote cast, bank that vote before Election Day. That's exactly what the Democrats are doing. The Republicans better do the same.
And by the way, I've been in we call it black ice, so it's on the pavement, asphalt, not good. You're right, vote early. And everyone in Georgia, there's a lot here on the line. When we come back, more examples, liberal leaders not following their own draconian COVID restrictions. New York Governor Cuomo got pretty testy with reporters when asked if schools are going to shut down or remain open. Where do you see this tape? Straight ahead.
Attention, do you have Medicare?
The virus is the truth. Everything it does is pure and true. It gets all of us sick. It doesn't give a damn what you think or who you vote for. And all of us now know we're headed the wrong way. New York City, the largest school district in the country, is closing down indefinitely because of rising rates. The chief doctor, Sanjay Gupta, is here to discuss with me. I'd like to do it this way, brother. I'd like to do it with what seems like good news, maybe good news, and I'm not sure it's good news. First, the good news. Rapid at-home test has been approved by the FDA. Is this a game changer?
I think so. I mean, these rapid at-home tests are a big deal. The issue is with this particular one that you're talking about, I think we have some pictures of it, but it requires a machine. You need to get a prescription, I think, for the various reagents or swabs. And I don't know that they're going to have enough of these machines, a common problem, until sort of the first quarter of next year. But fundamentally, Chris, you and I have been talking about testing from the start. The idea that you could have rapid, accurate, at-home testing that you don't need to send to a lab, don't need a machine, and that's actionable, that can basically tell you the question you're really trying to answer. Are you contagious? And if we could get to that point, and I think we can, those tests do exist, I think that would be huge. We just haven't invested in that. This test will be a big deal, but we don't have enough of them yet, Chris.
What's the cabbage factor? How much money?
I mean, the machine itself, my understanding, is around $50. The issue, the slowdown is really around the manufacturing of these things. I mean, if we had invoked, for example, the Defense Production Act around the first antigen test that had been authorized, and I'm talking back in May, June timeframe, we could be in a very different position now, Chris. I mean, every day or every couple of days, you and your family could test yourself in the morning while you're brushing your teeth, putting in your contacts, whatever. Within 15 minutes, you have a result, an actionable piece of data. They aren't perfect tests, but if they're applied as broadly as they could be around the country, they would make a huge difference.
Will it
Michael
price
Mina,
out the
who you
same
had on your
people?
show,
Will we price out people who have to worry the most already? So it's the $50, and then there's a VIG on the materials you need for every time you want to test. Will it become expensive in a way that you just can't afford it?
well, it could be. I mean, you know, the Binax tests that I'm describing, these antigen tests, are $5 a piece. You know, if you're doing it frequently, obviously that cost adds up. You're adding it for your whole family. It's a significant cost.
And no insurance.
The government went ahead, and right now, I mean, what happened was the government essentially, they bought 150 million of these tests for $750 million, and they are giving them out to areas that they think need them, some nursing homes, school districts, and things like that.
Not enough.
But for the average person out there, it's still a cost,
Yeah.
and it's not covered by insurance.
All right, so let's skip through these things real fast. The 95% effective for Pfizer. Good news, comma, but. What's the biggest but?
I think there's two big question marks I have. One is, how long does it last? You get the shot, and it sounds like from the data that the company has released, it's very effective at preventing people from getting sick with COVID. The vast majority of people who got sick in this trial were in the placebo group. You can see that's where the 95% number comes from, 162 versus 8. But how long does it last? Is this going to be a seasonal thing, a yearly thing like a flu shot? It's possible, because we do know the immunity may have a you know, months of half-life. The other question is basically, does it actually prevent infection? That may sound like an obvious thing. We know it prevents people from getting sick, and even severely sick, according to their data. But does it actually prevent people from getting infected? Does it keep them from transmitting the virus? Remember, Chris, people who don't even have symptoms can transmit this virus.
May keep your symptoms
So those
down,
are
but
two
still make
question
you
marks.
contagious. Good. The last one I left because I'm too personally invested. The school thing bothers me, Sanjay. Just tell the audience why this 3% thing is okay. The percentage in New York schools is not 3%. It's about half that. But because the overall percentage is 3%, they're going to shut down the schools. Why is 3% the right number? Why is closing down the schools the right thing when they don't even meet that 3% number? Why can't we find a better way than closing down?
Yeah, no, I don't relish these decisions, but the 3% number is, I mean, it's a bit of an arbitrary number. I mean, New York has been doing really, really well in terms of keeping these numbers down. You look at South Dakota, 56% positivity. So 3% by comparison seems pretty good. But that was the benchmark they set by which they would then shut down schools. But Chris, I agree with you, and I sense where your discomfort comes from, and that is that the positivity rate among schools, among those New York schools, 0.17%. So a lot lower, not just half, but a lot lower. And I gotta say, I was surprised. As you know, Chris, you and I talked about it, I was skeptical about getting kids back in school. I thought it was gonna end up being a huge, you know, sort of super spreader events. And yet schools, many of them have been able to keep a low positivity rate.
Right.
If you are hitting 3% in a big community like this, and you say that's your benchmark, there are other areas of society that seem to be bigger drivers of spread.
Yes.
Restaurants, bars, hotels, cafes, to name a few of them. 80% of spread is happening in those locations. So frankly, I would probably, you know, be focusing on those types of things first before going to schools.
And none of those things, all those things affect jobs, okay? And, you know, except religious gatherings, that's a separate issue. The schools affect jobs and all these other family vital things.
Right.
The inequalities among rich and poor are exacerbated. Keeping kids at home for school sucks. We all suck at it. Unless your kid, it's probably like your kids, by the way, probably self-starters and love doing the school thing, probably got your genes, and your wife's even smarter than you. But my kids, with their bad gene pool, you know, they're struggling at home. And now I have a wife who runs a business, she has to do this, and other people who work can't even go to work. And that's where you wind up closing down? I mean, it's so hard for people to accept. This 3% is no magic number. It's much lower in the schools. And I feel like we need more Sanjay Guptas in these localities where people are asking questions about, how do we do this better? Where else are they doing it better? What can we adopt? And it's like we're just stuck with the same metrics that are getting us just in and out of these holes. But Sanjay, I know you give it to us straight, and I know you give us the best reckoning. And that's just one reason that I love you. Have a good night, my brother.
Love you too, Chris. Talk to you soon.
And to stop the Biden administration from taking the reins and getting their transition moving.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you had a really interesting, good conversation with Stacey Abrams about this earlier in the hour, Ali. And I think that one thing that's interesting that we can see at work is what you were talking about with her about the Secretary of State in Georgia, the Republican Secretary of State, who's absolutely been involved in contentious voting rights disputes with voting rights advocates like Abrams and with Democrats in Georgia, but is emerging here as a sort of normal Republican and not a Trump Republican, in the sense that he's not exactly a champion of voting rights in Georgia. Georgia's had all these troubles, but he's also not willing to go along with the insanity of the Trump Republican claims that the Georgia election should be thrown out because of some magic dust that they've imagined they can cast over those election results. So I do think that this is accelerating in some small ways with Republican elections officials, whether it's the local commissioners in Pennsylvania or the Secretary of State in Georgia or other people who are just sort of, regular elected officials who are responsible for election integrity, finding themselves affronted by the president and what his legal team are trying to do in a way that I think maybe is giving us a little bit of a peek at a post-Trump Republican Party, or at least where the schism might be between Trumpism and Republicanism as we move forward. Also, though, I will admit to having
Rachel,
been
good to see you.
unsettled by that Wayne County thing. It only lasted for 3 hours, but that was an unsettling 3 hours.
It was an unsettling 3 hours. I told we started the show with the lieutenant governor, and at that point the votes weren't certified, and literally as we finished the interview, we got news that they had voted again. So on one hand, I'm very settled by the idea that public pressure did lead them to change that, but it was very unsettling that can these, after all this election, after all this democracy we work so hard for, after all the work that Stacey Abrams does to get people registered to vote, this is how it can be stopped? That was worrisome. Rachel, it is great to see you. I guess I should have had you hold up today's newspaper just so that people, your viewers, know that this was actually you today live. You come here, you come back when you are ready to do so, if it's tomorrow or Friday, but we are looking forward to having you back. Thank you, my friend.
I will do so. Thank you, Ali. And again, thank you so much for helming this so ably. We are, all of us at DRMS are so lucky to have you, my friend. Thank you.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Thanks, Rachel. More news ahead. Stay with us.
Died as a result of COVID. But the biggest fool and hypocrite award clearly goes to Gavin Newsom. I mean, go ahead.
Just because, so I've been having this battle on my radio show. Half my friends think I'm nuts because I get a flu shot every year. And I said, I absolutely would take the vaccine. Both of you have libertarian leanings. Sure. Larry, where are you on this?
I'm going to take the vaccine. Absolutely, I will.
Me too.
I take the flu shot every year, too. It isn't that I trust the government. It's that I'm trying to minimize the possibility that I contract the flu.
Now, half my friends think I'm nuts. The other half agree. Greg, I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I took the flu shot just last week. I do it every year. I will absolutely take the vaccine. There are some countries that are, in fact, considering making it mandatory. Everybody has to take the COVID vaccine.
What are you going to do, tie people down and put the shot in them, really?
Then you've got Kamala Harris, who is suggesting in a debate that she might not take the vaccine because Donald Trump was behind the development of the vaccine, even though it was done by highly regarded scientists and pharmaceutical companies.
How about we
and
believe
the
in
FDA
freedom?
will have to approve it based on safety.
I believe in freedom. All right. People can choose. You read, do your own reading, talk to your own doctors. When we come back, a group of Harvard students reportedly now seeking to ban any members from the Trump administration from even speaking on campus.
Introducing Copperfield.
Made ourselves into a people.
You never stop me. Nausea, diarrhea, trouble sleeping, tiredness, and anxiety.
So much process to the Biden-Harris administration. The law orders the GSA administrator to sign that document as soon as there is what the law calls an apparent successful candidate in the presidential election. The law specifies that, for example, every news organization calling the presidential election for Joe Biden is a more than adequate identification of an apparent winner to trigger the official beginning of the transition. And for 11 days now, Emily Murphy's refusal to sign the document authorizing the transition means that she is silently lying to this country and the world. Emily Murphy is telling the lie that there is no apparent winner in the presidential election. On Monday, Joe Biden said that what Emily Murphy is doing means more people may die. Those were his words. More people may die. Today, in a meeting with healthcare workers, President-elect Joe Biden said this.
One of the problems that we're having now is the failure of the administration to recognize. The law says that the General Services Administration has a person who recognizes who the winner is, and then they have to have access to all the data and information that the government possesses to be prepared. And it doesn't require there to be an absolute winner. It says the apparent winner, the apparent winner. And we've been unable to get access to the kinds of things we need to know. And there's a whole lot of things that are we just don't have available to us, which unless it's made available soon, we're going to be behind by weeks or months being able to put together the whole initiative relating to the biggest promise we have, with two drug companies coming along and finding 95% effectiveness, efficiency in the vaccines, which is an enormous promise. So I just want to tell you that's the only slowdown right now that we have.
More people may die because of Emily Murphy. The first person Emily Murphy sent out to lie for her was her government-paid spokesperson, Pamela Pennington, who said 3 days after Joe Biden became the apparent winner, quote, "An ascertainment has not yet been made, and its administrator will continue to abide by and fulfill all requirements under the law." That is a lie. Pamela Pennington lied for Emily Murphy, who is not abiding by and fulfilling all requirements under the law. Emily Murphy is violating all of the requirements under the law. And Pamela Pennington is lying about that for Emily Murphy. No one else Emily Murphy has sent out to lie for her has been willing to have their names become public. And so, hiding behind their status as anonymous sources, friends of Emily Murphy are now telling reporters lies like this. Emily is a consummate professional, a deeply moral person, but also a very scrupulous attorney who is in a very difficult position with an unclear law and precedents that is behind her stance. Every bit of that is a lie. The Inspector General's findings about Emily Murphy prove that she is the opposite of a consummate professional. She is not a very scrupulous attorney because she is violating a federal law and should face possible disbarment proceedings for that. There is nothing unclear in the law, and there is absolutely no precedent for what Emily Murphy is doing. And as to Emily Murphy being a deeply moral person, tell that to the many people who may die because of Emily Murphy. Here's something else Emily Murphy's friends get to say under the cloak of anonymity to reporters now. She's doing what she believes is her honest duty as someone who has sworn true allegiance to the Constitution of the United States of America and the laws that govern her position. Emily Murphy did swear true allegiance to the Constitution, and she violates that oath every day. Emily Murphy is refusing to say whether she's been in communication with Donald Trump about refusing to authorize the transition, an illegal act. But it's not up to Donald Trump. The law gives full responsibility and full authority to Emily Murphy to authorize the transition. If Donald Trump is ordering Emily Murphy to not authorize the transition, while the law is ordering her to authorize the transition, that choice is very, very easy for anyone who has ever lived by their oath of office. When I worked in the Senate, I knew hundreds of people, including elected officials and staff members, including Democrats and including Republicans, who would know exactly what to do if they had to choose between an illegal order and their oath of office. They would do the right thing. They would follow the law. They would do what Christopher Krebs did. Donald Trump fired Christopher Krebs last night because Christopher Krebs told the truth about this election and said it was the most secure election in our history. Donald Trump appointed Christopher Krebs to be the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Christopher Krebs took an oath of office to do that job, and when he had to choose between what Donald Trump wanted and his oath of office, it was easy for Christopher Krebs. Easy. He chose the truth. He lived by his oath of office, and I'm sure Christopher Krebs doesn't consider himself a hero tonight. I'm sure for him it was an easy choice. For heroes, it never feels like heroism because they don't think they have a choice. They think doing the right thing is the only thing they can do. Emily Murphy works for Donald Trump. She's not supposed to. She's supposed to work for you. But tragically for this country and the world, Emily Murphy sees herself as someone who works for Donald Trump. And she's always been willing to do what Donald Trump wants her to do. But for the last 11 days, Emily Murphy has become the most valuable player for a lot more people around the world than just Donald Trump. Just think about how pleased Vladimir Putin is with Emily Murphy tonight. Here is President Obama's former National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, earlier today on MSNBC with Andrea Mitchell.
This is the most irresponsible leadership during a transition that I think any of us have seen in our lifetimes, if not in the history of the Republic. When you have the President of the United States daily, constantly discrediting the election, pouring doubt on the results, false doubt, that not only misinforms a huge segment of our population and corrodes trust in our democracy and our institutions themselves, but makes us a laughingstock around the world and does great damage to the democratic model, which is why I'm quite sure that Vladimir Putin is doing a happy dance in Moscow as we speak.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Samantha Power, President Obama's former ambassador to the United Nations. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Education of an Idealist, one of the most beautifully written memoirs of anyone who has served in government. Samantha Power, Ambassador Power, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want to begin with your reaction to what we saw develop with Christopher Krebs over the last 24 hours and him simply taking the principled stand, which for him, I'm sure, felt like there was no choice, and then the result of that with Donald Trump.
Well, I have been tracking the work of that office in the Department of Homeland Security for some time and have been really struck and really impressed by its rigor, by its technical proficiency, by the fact, as you say, more recently in a more high-profile way, by the fact that it plays it straight and just goes by the facts. Many months.
The press is evil. Orwellian? Oh my gosh. Let me quote some Orwell then. Quote, "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words, and KELO has done beautifully. A mouthpiece for an administration that is consistently denying the truth, throwing lies back at us." You know, I'm sure if you tuned in, if you've been watching this network and me for a long time, KELO used to sit on this very show, and she used to tell the truth about Trump. But then, you know, ambition kicked in. Now she sits there at the White House and she tells lies. Did you know there's a clip with her calling CNN her network, on our network. And she's not the only one. I want you to see what CNN's K-File uncovered. What one of the president's ride or die defenders, his legal advisor, Jenna Ellis, wrote about his supporters. This was back in March of 2016. People always think, oh, what are you talking about Trump supporters? This is one of his apologists. Quote, "His supporters don't care about facts or logic. They aren't seeking truth. Trump probably could shoot someone in the middle of NYC and not lose support. And this is the cumulative reason why this nation is in such terrible shape. We don't have truth seekers, we have narcissists." Jenna Ellis, Quote, "The hypocrisy is relentless. It's never ending. They don't care." The president doesn't care what he destroys as long as he can claim victory. Okay? As long as he can claim victory. Today he tweeted out a Reuters poll. The poll shows that Trump's defiance of the election results and his false claims are already affecting the public's confidence in American democracy. So the president who, before he lost Joe Biden, he used to tweet polls about winning, is now tweeting polls about Americans losing faith in our democracy and our elections. As if that is winning for him. Maybe it is. If winning is a zero-sum game where he wins and our democracy loses, believe me, he would be okay with that. Are you? Tonight he remains holed up behind closed doors in the White House, nursing his grievances. Former advisor to the former president, Valerie Jarrett, tweeting, "Someone is hiding in the basement and it is not Joe Biden." Where was Joe Biden? Holding a virtual roundtable with frontline workers today, getting emotional as he listened to this. This is Mary Turner. Mary Turner is an ICU nurse on the night shift in the COVID unit, the head of the Minnesota Nurses Association. Here she is.
I myself have held the hand of dying patients who are crying out for their family that they can't see. I've taken care of co-workers as they fight for their lives on a ventilator and knowing that they got sick because of the hospital or their government hasn't protected them. I'm sorry, I'm so emotional.
No.
It's just...
You got me emotional. I observed the incredible mental strain on nurses in ICU units.
I don't care what you think about Joe Biden, or if you voted for him or not. Don't really care. That is a human reaction to a horrible situation. That is a recognition that we can't go on like this. Have you heard the current president ever?
Do it through Hollywood. They're going to do it through the celebrity athletes, and they're going to do it through their favorite professors at their Ivy League schools that are also basically spying for China and double dipping through the talents program. So they're going to have to stand strong and really, I think, figure out what their true values are, because all of their favorites, Hollywood and academia and athletic stars, NBA and others, are going to push back very hard. Big money, and that's going to be very tempting.
And Congressman Scalise, really quickly, do you not agree at this moment that the working class voter is the natural Republican Party voter at this point, given where they're aligning toward China and more outsourcing, more global concerns versus American concerns?
They truly are, and you can see that in so many of the swing states that we won, so many of the swing House districts where President Trump really did help us flip so many of the seats that we won in Congress, because President Trump stood up for those hardworking men and women who Washington had left behind. Members of Congress and presidents from both parties were not looking out for those folks. President Trump was bringing those jobs back. President Trump, by the way, stood up to the bullies. And the bullies are still around. China's still there. Russia's still there. Iran is still there. And if Joe Biden were to literally hand over the keys to the store again like he did when he was in the White House last time, it was Joe Biden and Barack Obama who gave Iran a nuclear weapon. That's not the route that those blue-collar workers want to see us go.
I think there's a progressive populist coalition that could be in the offing. I'm going to hold out hope. Congressman, great to see you both. It's a very interesting topic tonight. Plus, the political realignment of the working class Americans against Democrat corporatists is underway. In a few places, is it more obvious than in Minnesota's Iron Range? Now, first, remember, President Trump won over the hardworking people of that region with his America First agenda, but now he's winning over their elected officials. Today, Tom Back and David Tomassoni, two prominent state senators who represent the Iron Range, split from their Democrat Party.
This is by no means a small thing. Now, Bach served as the Dems' minority leader until earlier this year. The former Dems split will help bolster the GOP majority's ability to get things done in that state, much to the delight of my next guest. Minnesota State Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka joins me now. Paul, the defectors are going to get committee chairs from the GOP majority. They're officially called independents now. But why does this matter, and what should the rest of the country take from it?
They need to know that the blue-collar workers, the blue-collar senators that represent them are coming our way. You know, just in the last year, the state Democratic Party decided to have a ban on copper-nickel mining in Minnesota, when on the Iron Range, that's the second largest deposit in the whole world. Prior to that, to stop replacement of a pipeline with rather than a 50-year-old pipe, get a brand new one. They keep stopping all of the things that the blue-collar workers want up there. First, we had 7 mayors that stood up, Democrat mayors that stood up for President Trump. Now we have 2 prominent Democrat leaders that have gone independent and are aligning with Republicans, and it does show that we're making a difference in Minnesota and across the country for blue-collar workers.
Yeah, I'm still stunned, Congressman, that the Minnesota voters went for Biden. I actually, after the riots, after the leveling of all those buildings on East Lake Street, after the incompetence of the liberal response initially, the burning of the police precinct, I just cannot believe Minnesota would vote for Joe Biden. I frankly am stunned, and I don't know what you think about that, but I really held out hope that Minnesota would frankly get it right.
Yeah, I honestly thought that we would win. Nixon was the last one to win in Minnesota. I do think there's something called Minnesota nice or passive aggressive, one of the two. But at the same time, we kept the Republican majority in our state Senate. That's the first time ever that we won back-to-back majorities. Yeah. And so I'm hopeful. The Minnesota Police Officers Association now endorses more Republicans than Democrats. Many of the blue-collar unions now endorse more Republicans than Democrats. So it's shifting. I sure wish Trump would have won Minnesota. I think he deserved to win for all the good things he's done for Minnesota.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for the update on these important state defections. We have to keep our eye on all levers of government, and state, local, and federal. Now remember, all the media hysteria about COVID immunity only lasting a couple of months. Remember, if you got it, oh, it's only good for, some people said weeks. Well, that's why they said we needed to hand over billions to Big Pharma for vaccines. Well, now it looks like those dire predictions were wrong, and the angle was, once again, proven right. We're going to explain it all next.
So good to see you. You too. So really, how are you? Oh, well, look, that's what we're both taking right now, Fanapt. You know, that's really been helping me manage my schizophrenia. I used to hear these terrible voices. I used to feel like everyone was staring at me. But we're doing much better now, right?
Yeah. Fanapt is approved for the treatment of schizophrenia in a...
How's that for white privilege? Asks Robin Givhan in a brilliant piece of writing in the Washington Post today, where she writes, Trump's refusal to concede, or at least stop obstructing a peaceful transition of power, can be described as many things: delusional, childish, unpatriotic, dangerous, but above all else, it has been a tremendous display of the deference afforded to this man, as a man who also happens to be white and wealthy. He has been able to muster the breathless support of both men and women because he lays claim to the benefit of the doubt even when there isn't even a shadow of it. White male privilege is powerful. It overrides facts, it excuses horrendous behavior, it exalts the unqualified. And joining us now is the writer of that piece, Robin Gibbons, senior critic at large for the Washington Post, and Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. Jonathan will be interviewing former President Barack Obama right here tomorrow night at 10 p.m. for the full hour. But Robin, let me begin with you and this way you have focused our thinking about what we're looking at when we watch Donald Trump ride around golf courses, never speaking a word to the public, having conclusively, definitively lost the election, but not being asked to ever admit that by any Republicans in Washington.
Yeah, I think for me, what was particularly striking was that white privilege obviously has benefited the president before. The president has golfed before, but those two things really seem to be distilled and concentrated at a particular time when so many people, the crisis over the coronavirus pandemic has so intensified, and the president has essentially gone missing. The only times we really have seen him substantially have been on the golf course. And it also seemed that the only reason he was being coddled, he was given so much deference and patience, was not because of anything rooted in fact, but simply because it was his privilege.
And Jonathan, there's another line that Robin has that goes after this privilege and focuses it in a way that I think is so important. She says, in truth, Trump doesn't even look like he's having a particularly good time golfing. He simply appears to be avoiding the dreadfulness of his responsibilities. Such is his privilege.
And that line, and in fact, the entire column is why Robin Givhan is one of the best political writers out there, and why I tweeted it was a must-read column. Robin nailed it. I wrote down this note. In addition to what Robin just said about what the president's doing, he's just given up on the charade of actually working. I mean, there have been lots of stories about how many times he's gone to his golf courses, how many times he's gone to Bedminster and Mar-a-Lago and traveling all over the country, and doing these, big markered proclamations in the Oval Office while also watching television and live tweeting Fox News. But now, with the election over and being totally repudiated by the American people, with President-elect Joe Biden getting the largest number of votes in American history, President Trump's just decided, well, why bother even going through the motions of running this country? The only thing he's doing is golfing and firing people, which doesn't take a whole lot of energy. This is the most important time between administrations in normal times. But then you throw on top of it a pandemic that is running rampant because the president isn't paying attention and isn't doing anything about it. And then the effects of that on the economy. We should have a president, an outgoing president who is focused on handing the country over to his successor as stably as possible. And instead, he's on the back nine riding around in his golf cart.
And Robin, his privilege is such, especially with Republicans in Washington, that it is not to, his inability to face reality and the coddling that he needs now is not to be regarded as weakness. It's as if they regard it as some kind of strength.
Yeah, they seem to have this attitude that, he really needs to be, they need to stand down, because there is this sense of his elevation, there's this sense of his entitlement. It's not even so much that they are, focusing on, the trauma that he has lost. They seem mostly to be focusing on simply his feelings. And, he needs his space, and he needs patience, and he needs time. So it seems that they're allowing him to fill up this space a space that really should be occupied by the president-elect, Joe Biden.
Jonathan, at this hour tomorrow night, I'm going to be watching TV. You're going to be on TV.
Cells to know how to redo when re-challenged with the same infection. They know how to fight that infection and do it more efficiently than the first time around. And the good news, Laura, is that the new vaccines produce a greater immunity than the natural infection themselves. So there's a lot of great news here.
And Alex, on this issue of masks and the New York Times reporting on that Danish study that was considered to be so controversial, people didn't even want to talk about it. What should we take away from this?
What we should take away is that masks are basically useless as a protective measure. I mean, there wasn't much data about that before. There had been a very good meta-analysis done several months ago that was published in the CDC journal that suggested that. But this study was randomized. It had several thousand people, and it essentially showed that wearing masks does not protect the wearer at all from the coronavirus, not from the flu. This was done, this spring in Denmark, and it was done with the coronavirus. It was a very, very well-designed study. Frankly, if a drug company had a drug in trials that had this trial result, they would discontinue development of the drug. There's just no evidence that masks protect the wearer. Now, we can discuss this other issue of source control. We can discuss my mask protects you. There's not very good evidence for that, but that's much harder to test in a big randomized trial. But the CDC said last week masks may protect the wearer, and they should just stop saying that. There's no evidence for that.
I mean, Dr. Grace, this is just wild. I mean, you can't go anywhere in the United States without people in masks. You don't know how long they've been wearing them, whether they were, supposed to be disposable and they've been wearing them for a week. But this is mask mandate on steroids now, everywhere, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, and I agree with Alex. The problem here is there's a big difference between masks. In the hospital, we wear N95 masks and face protection because we're in an environment taking care of COVID patients where the virus is very active and very concentrated. But when you get out into the public, people wear neckwear and fashionable masks, and these have been shown to be less than 1/100th as effective as the N95 mask. The N95 mask is not something you can wear all day. It's an awful thing to have to wear. But we put up with it because of the risks. But what you see out in that are the fashionable things people are wearing now offer very little, if any, protection at all.
No, and Alex, really quickly, like the Twitter scolds are tweeting today saying, "Oh well, we've said it only protects. It's for others, not for you." But so if the virus can't get through to you,
there's not really evidence of that. That's right. Why would you think this works one way and not the other? Now, there's a lot of complicated mechanistic stuff here, but the fact is, the doctor is right. N95s, they are completely different species, and that's been, you can demonstrate that 100 different ways. But the mask, the cloth mask, or even the surgical mask that the CDC recommends, this Danish study just puts the end to this.
Yeah, well, then they had the Marines. Yeah, we had the Marine quarantine survey as well that showed that Marines who were in the clearest lockdown, they still got it with masks and social distancing. I mean, that was even more, to me, that was even more devastating on both fronts.
That's right.
Let me get into what de Blasio is saying about schools. This was today. He announced that the schools in New York would be closing. Watch.
We do need to close our schools for the coming days. We set a very clear standard, and we need to stick to that standard. Our teams have been talking throughout the morning on exactly what it would take to come back and bring our schools back quickly, and it will be a higher standard. I want that to be clear. We have a stringent health and safety standard right now. We're going to have to raise that up even higher to be able to bring our schools back.
Dr. Grace, there's no science here. This is just wrecking ball to our young people. I am so outraged by this. The testing of the kids, the positivity rate was like 0.23% as of Monday. This is insanity.
And it's also interfering with herd immunity, which is very important in the successful conquering of this virus and returning to normal.
Alex, on schools, you've been such an outspoken critic of these closures. Final thoughts on this?
I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's punishing children for a virus that they are effectively at no risk from. I'm not sure why we're doing this except to placate teachers union. And, many jurisdictions now are talking about no schools through at least April. Okay, and some places are saying don't expect schools until fall of 2021. Already you can see it is just wrong. And
This is child abuse. It's child abuse, and people voted for this. This is what I don't understand. Parents, if you voted for the Democrats, this is what you voted for. This is absolute insanity. Gentlemen, I don't want to grandstand over you. Thank you, though, so much. Holidays for me, but not for thee. Well, blue state tyrants from coast to coast are working to destroy your holiday traditions.
So there are new signs emerging that people in President Trump's orbit are growing frustrated over his refusal to concede the election. Sources are telling CNN that a handful of current and former Trump administration officials have quietly started to reach out to members of President-elect Joe Biden's transition team. But many Republicans still publicly supporting President Trump's stonewalling or silently standing by him. Joining me now is New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman. We're always happy to have him. By the way, he's the author of Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. Good to see you, Mr. Friedman. I appreciate you joining. So
great to be with you.
You were worried about the fate of America before the election. How are you feeling now?
Well, quite mixed. On the one hand, Don, we actually just had a remarkable election. More Americans voted in this election than any time in our history. And their neighbors and friends went out and counted the votes. And they did it despite a spreading pandemic. And they seem to have done it quite well. It's really the most impressive election we've had since Lincoln defeated McClellan in 1864 in the middle of a civil war. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is that we have a president who has really sought to soil this amazing achievement by fraudulently claiming fraud. But Don, I've been thinking and was listening to the show before I came on here that there's one silver lining of this whole process of recounts. When Americans see, when all this is done, they're going to see two things, I believe. One is that the votes really were counted fairly. There'll be maybe some discrepancies of a few hundred votes here and there. And the courts really are not rising to all these bogus challenges. And in a weird way, it may strengthen the system and may actually strengthen Biden's legitimacy. Because there's one thing no one's going to be able to legitimately claim when all this is over, and that's that the election was stolen, that the votes weren't counted properly.
You have been, you must be reading my text messages that I have been sending to people saying the same exact thing when they started this whole recount thing. I said, but in the end, it'll show that the election was real, and it may break some people from their spell. So we'll see. I think you're right about that. A significant number of Republicans, though, Tom, they're being led to believe that President Trump rightfully won the election. The well is being poisoned before Joe Biden even begins, before he even gets in office. What does that mean for the Biden presidency when it does begin?
Well, I think two things that are on my mind right now, Don, is that once Trump is gone, what will be this Republican Party? We really don't know. Will he continue to hold a spell over them? We really don't know. I'm not going to make any predictions about that. But I think one of the things that could emerge is a group of moderate, sane conservatives who realize that this version of the GOP is really unhealthy, that the country a sane conservative movement. If we have a healthy conservative movement, we'll have a healthier liberal movement, I believe. And I wouldn't be surprised if you get some kind of breakaway thing going. And that could be a real challenge to Republicans, because if you have a sane conservative party split off, if it just wins 5-10% of the vote, that party can't win any national election. So I think once the spell of Trump is broken, Don, anything is possible.
So, you covered other parts of the world for decades, right? You've seen firsthand what can happen when people lose faith in government institutions. Are you confident America will find a better path?
Well, what worries me right now, Don, is that we're just in this moment of intense insecurity. We don't know who's in charge. We don't know where the pandemic is going. And because of the nature of how news is being produced these days and this administration, we don't know what to believe. And I don't recall in our history a moment of this kind of anxiety. Now, I don't know how we do it, Don, but when this election is over and Trump passes from the seat, we have got to find a way, as a society, Republicans and Democrats together, we have got to find a way to restore the stigma to lying. What's been broken here is the stigma on lying. We not only have people now just lying freely, without any worry about being called out on it. And lying and enervating people and enraging people has become an industry. It's going to need its own line in our GDP report, you know? And somehow we have, as a society, we got to work on that, because you can't have a democracy without truth and trust. Without truth, we can't agree where to go. And without trust, we can't go there together.
Got it.
And so we need a weekend retreat.
Yeah, listen, I got to run. I just want to tell you, this is November 5th at 6:32 p.m. Someone who works in politics said, I hear Trump is going in all in on fraud. And this was my response. Yeah, makes him look weak, exposes his frailty. Good for system ultimately, because it will show system is not fraudulent. No widespread voter fraud. Imperfect system, yes. Widespread fraud, no. That was on November 5th. So you're reading my mind. Yeah. And let's hope we're both right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And next, the U.S. passing 250,000 deaths from coronavirus today, but Health and Human Services staffers are being told not to speak with Biden's transition team. Former HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius reacts next.
By December 5th, remember, this is the beginning of Lent for New Orleanians and people who come to visit. She sandbagged them with this November 17th decision. Cantrell say Carnival is not canceled, but like Halloween, without trick-or-treating, it's over. It is. And that's a tragedy.
Well, first of all, we don't even know if social distancing and masks work after that New York Times story about the Danish, controlled study on masks. And, we don't know really what works, but we do know people need to have their traditions, and there must be a safe way to do something fun.
But they want to silo us, Laura. They want to keep us apart, and I don't like that. We need to come together as community and as families, certainly. As a symbol of the state of this holiday season, at least in New York City, the Rockefeller Center tree was erected this week. It was not a pretty picture. This is like the Charlie Brown Christmas tree fully grown, Laura. What a sad, broken down, floppy-looking mess this thing is. But it is the perfect image. It really does capture Christmas in New York this year, sadly.
Well, that's a depressing sight. Now, Raymond, speaking of rather sad and broken down messes, well, Barack Obama is making the rounds for his new book while tamping down expectations for his old pal Joe.
A new president can set a new tone. That's not going to solve all the gridlock in Washington. It has now become a contest where issues, facts, policies per se don't matter as much as identity and wanting to beat the other guy.
Oh my Laura,
just a
it
few
takes
days
forever
ago.
To say anything.
Oh, no, it is, and we edited that. But just a few days ago, Biden was promising to be the great healer, the unifier. Now he's apparently just a new tone. Now, here he was today at an economic event, and if he isn't entirely coherent or promising change, at least there's this.
There is hope on the way, not because of me. I'm not like, hope's on the way. But there's a realization that's coming upon everyone, and I promise you, I will be using the Defense Authorization Act. I will be using the bully pulpit. The words of a president matter, whether they're good, smart, bad, or good.
Or bad. Laura, what was that? Amazing thing here, I listened to this press conference. It was like a medley of his old stump speeches, kind of all thrown in a bag and shaken. Hope's coming, hope's coming. None of it made any sense. It was very peculiar. And Laura, even as recounts continue and lawsuits are being filed by the president's team, there is great pressure on President Trump to just concede and move on. Former First Lady Michelle Obama is becoming upset.
She said this on Instagram. The presidency doesn't belong to any one individual or any one party. Donald Trump had spread racist lies about my husband that had put my family in danger. That wasn't something I was ready to forgive, but I knew that for the sake of our country, I had to find the strength and maturity to put my anger aside. Thank goodness Michelle was kind enough to relinquish the presidency. First lady status, sorry, for the good of the country. Well, she kind of dismisses, Raymond, any election irregularities, the president's challenges, as baseless conspiracy theories. That's not surprising.
Well, they're not baseless, though. I mean, look, whether the president can gain in the recount, we've seen movement in Georgia in that hand ballot audit. An election audit today found more than 5,600 additional ballots across 3 counties, and it's shrinking Biden's lead over Trump in the state. It's not enough to change the outcome, but every legal vote must be counted, and we need to see where are these ballots hiding, what hasn't been counted.
Yeah.
Americans deserve that accounting, and that's what I think the president's after here.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh had a great show today where he went through all of these affidavits from people who've been working in ballot counting for 20 years, who cited really disturbing things that they had seen, and just dismissing it because you're Michelle Obama, and I guess you can, I mean, doesn't make it go away. Raymond, thank you so much.
No. Thank you.
And what would a Trump 2024 campaign look like, and how soon could he announce? And how good would his chances actually be? Mark Thiessen has laid out a step-by-step plan. And
20,565 votes. Today, George Christensen and Scott McDonald, the clerks for Milwaukee and Dane counties, said this about the recounts.
I'm not surprised that they selected Dane and Milwaukee counties. They certainly didn't select them for irregularities. They selected them because they're Democratic strongholds, of course.
Oh, it's so frustrating. You know, we were trained, and George and I trained for a year and a half or more for this kind of disinformation to come from the Kremlin. You know, that's what we were trying to figure out, how we're going to try to mitigate that disinformation and point it out. A lot of these, but we never thought it would be coming from ourselves, from within the United States.
Joining us now is Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul. General Kaul, can you tell us what you expect in this recount process and whether it will lead to any possible election litigation trying to overturn the results?
Well, first, the recount itself is virtually certain to confirm what we already know, which is that Joe Biden won Wisconsin by about 20,000 votes. As you mentioned before, we had a recount 4 years ago, and the change in net votes for the candidates was about 131 votes. We had one after a 2011 state Supreme Court race as well, and the kinds of statewide recounts are in the hundreds, nothing even approaching 20,000 votes. Now, the Trump campaign does seem to be a little confused about how this process works, because in their recount petition, they raised a variety of legal claims, but the time for legal claims relating to the rules of the election is well before the election. There's even a doctrine that says you can't file claims too close to an election because you need to have certainty about what the rules are. To now bring those arguments after voting has happened, after ballots have been cast, and after about 20,000 more Wisconsinites voted for Joe Biden than voted for Donald Trump, it's too late for those kinds of challenges.
So will this delay the certification of results in Wisconsin?
It shouldn't. The recount needs to be done by December 1st, and that's the deadline for certifying the results. So absent some sort of court order or something else that interferes with the process moving forward, certification will have to happen on December 1st.
So it sounds like the Trump campaign believes that this is not just counting votes, but it's some kind of evidentiary discovery of some sort in which they might, at the end of the process, end up with a legal claim. Is that even possible if all we're doing is counting votes?
That's what they're suggesting, but that's not how the recount process works. As you said, a recount is about recounting the votes. It's about confirming that the numbers were accurate. They may very well file a legal challenge as the recount is going on or at the end of it, but any kind of challenge like that is certain to fail. We've seen the Trump campaign's success in court post-election, and they keep losing case after case. And the reason is because their claims have no merit, and if they were to file a challenge in Wisconsin, I'm confident that it would be swiftly rejected by the courts.
So, Attorney General Call, knowing everything you know about this, the vote count as it is, the recount process as it will work, Wisconsin's history with recounts, the likely numerical changes as a result of a recount, would you say tonight that we know who the winner of the state of Wisconsin is?
Yeah, there's no question about who's won the state of Wisconsin. Donald Trump is basically in the equivalent position of somebody who has bought a lottery ticket, but he's bought the ticket after the lottery has happened. It's over, and we know who has won this election.
And that is President-elect Joe Biden?
That's right.
Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Powell, thank you very much for clarifying that and for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
In 2024, that freezes everything. Ted, Marco, Nikki, Josh, you name them. They cannot make a move now because they're still being held hostage by Trump and the base.
Mark, what are they afraid of? What are people on the left afraid of? If they won this fair and square,
of 72 million people that he can take the presidency. That he almost won it despite everything they threw at him. He almost won it this time, and he can win it next time, especially if the Biden years, if he does all the things we expect him to do, which is to slow economic growth and lock us down again and all the rest of it. But to do that, Trump has to leave the presidency the right way. So my plan for him is this in short form. One, cooperate with the Biden transition even while you're pursuing the legal challenges. It doesn't hurt to give him the presidential daily brief. That way he can't blame you for screwing it up if we get a terrorist attack after Trump leaves office. When Biden is finally declared the winner by the Electoral College, say you're stepping aside for the sake of the country. Don't concede that the election was necessarily fair or that it was legitimate, but you're going to come and reclaim it in 4 years. Then immediately announce that you're running in 2024 before the inauguration. And then as the 2024 declared candidate, go and lead the Republican Party to keep control of the Senate in Georgia. Be the guy who we are not going to win that election unless Donald Trump does what he did in the closing days of the November election by holding rallies and bringing out his base. Then he can leave with a big victory, and that'll be the first salvo of the 2024 campaign. Then give a farewell address. You know, one of the traditions in politics today is every president gives a farewell address. This will be a farewell address unlike anyone has ever done because it's going to be MacArthur-esque. It's going to be I shall return. And then have a gracious transfer of power, invite Biden to the White House, ride with him to the Capitol, attend the inauguration, and then immediately start your campaign. Go and take back the House in 2022. We almost took back the House under Donald Trump's leadership in this election, and there are 26 seats up that the Democrats won by 52% or less. He can win if he can in 2 years' time. He can knock Nancy Pelosi out of the speaker's position, then go win the White House in 2024.
Well, that's quite a journey. I want to see all these challenges play out. But Mark, that is a fascinating blueprint. We really appreciate it. Up next, the year's sexiest man alive. We'll tell you about it.
Their reputation, their insight, your advantage.
We don't just cover financial news, we anticipate it.
Barron's Roundtable, Friday, only on Fox Business. Brought to you by Invesco QQQ. Invest in the innovators of the NASDAQ 100.
Time for new reading glasses? Go to readers.com. Choose from hundreds of styles and colors for under $20. And now, enter this exclusive TV coupon code at checkout to save up to 40%. That's readers.com.
This is the all-new Nutrisystem, the personal weight loss plan that adapts to your metabolism.
It's a simple plan that works for my body.
It works with my metabolism. I could feel the energy.
You'll get delicious food delivered free and our money-back guarantee.
We lost the weight.
We're learning how to keep it off. When you've got a plan, you're unstoppable.
Order now. Get 50% off and month of meals and shakes. Go online or call 877-886-FIT2.
At times like these, it's important to know that you're staying safe at home. Visiting Angels is committed to your safety and comfort. Our compassionate caregivers provide one-on-one essential home care services for our senior loved ones. At Visiting Angels, personal home care is our passion. We're here for you.
Visiting Angels, America's choice in home care.
Attention, the weed killer Roundup has been linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
The manufacturer of Roundup has set aside over $10 billion for victims of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
If you are diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after using the popular weed killer Roundup, call us right now. You may be entitled to substantial compensation.
Call now. Find out if you may qualify in under 2 minutes.
Call 1-800-200-5500. That's 1-800-200-5500.
There's an exotic place where you can swim in the sky.
Yes, I think the statement actually was quite accurate. It really does depict the situation out here. We're in dire straits. As I've said throughout the last several weeks, I believe that we are in the most dangerous public health moment since 1918. What we're seeing right now with this exponential growth is frightening in several regards. First of all, just the cases and what that means in terms of the serious illness and deaths, but also what it's doing to our healthcare system. It is literally teetering right now. There are hospitals out there that are literally on the brink of being completely overwhelmed for the lack of staff and support efforts. So that this is really a very, very critical moment. And I don't think the public hears that in voices from people like me and others. But hopefully the frontline workers, like you saw today with that video with the president-elect, will help convince people this is real.
You have been telling us that this is where we were going to be at this point in November all year. Even when we saw that early surge and then we saw numbers start to go down in some places, and you guaranteed us that we would see them go back up, especially at this time of year. It's happening exactly as the way you told us. What should we be doing as individuals and as communities to get from here to this spring, possibly, where we might have access to a vaccine?
Well, I think there's been a real sea change in our journey. You know, a few weeks ago, I did a podcast where I talked about light inside the tunnel, not the end of the tunnel. You know, with the results that we've seen over the past 2 weeks with these vaccines, it gives us all renewed hope that we can make a big difference in this disease. We just have to hold out to get there. So now, instead of people having to just try to reduce case numbers for one more month or one more month or one more month, we can say we need to get to the point of these vaccines arriving. And I think they're going to start arriving soon. We won't have substantial amounts of vaccine till well into the first quarter and potentially the second quarter of next year. But now we can see a path out. And so we have a choice. Do we want to continue to put ourselves at risk, swapping air with people, which we shouldn't be doing, and getting to the point of developing immunity from natural disease, but also incurring thousands of deaths? Or can we do our best to hold out and get to those vaccines and have a very, very different year next year?
Michael Osterholm, thank you very much for your guidance that you've been giving us consistently on this network since COVID-19 invaded our lives. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And a quick programming note, tomorrow night at this hour, Jonathan Capehart with President Barack Obama in conversation for the full hour. Do not miss it. That is tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Brian Williams starts now.
Well, good evening once again. Day 1399 of the Trump administration, 63 days until the inauguration, 15 days since the presidential election, and 11 days since Joe Biden was declared the winner of the race. And yes, we have a president who refuses to concede. He loses his power of office at noon on January 20th. The rest of it is petulance and politics and paperwork, and it's all happening against this god-awful and uncontrolled pandemic that again today reached another awful milestone. The death toll today went over 250,000 Americans. People who were with us at the start of 2020 will now not be here to see another New Year's Eve. This map shows just how widespread the virus is, where the cases are. This was put out by the government. Take a moment, look at the area of red, find where you live, where your friends and family live. This is a snapshot of our country as of tonight. Also, as of this evening, there are nearly 80,000 Americans hospitalized with COVID-19. That's another all-time high. Yet today was another day of radio silence from the president. As he stayed hunkered down in the White House, he continues to watch TV. He remains a constant presence on social media, spreading more falsehoods, disinformation about Joe Biden's election victory. We did hear from Trump's press secretary, who insists the president is focused on his job.
Well, the president's hard at work. He's hard at work on COVID, among other issues. I'm sure you'll hear from him at the right moment.
The administration's testing czar had a very different view. This afternoon, he sounded the alarm about our current situation.
Right now, we are in the steepest rate of rise in numbers of cases. Our hospitalizations are going up 25% week over week. Our deaths are going up by 25% week over week. And this is not going in the right direction. We are at the most serious and dangerous part of the pandemic.
A new study estimates there may be as many as 3.6 million people in this country infected and shedding enough virus to infect others around them. A wave of new restrictions, stay-at-home advisories, mask mandates now accelerating as governors impose more rules to try to slow the infections. Starting tomorrow, New York City's public schools will be closed indefinitely.
Because their students are going to school, that's extremely important. And I guess the message I would like to put out there to the general public is, take a minute and shoot your school administrator an email or a phone call or a text, and teachers as far as that goes, and school board members, and just, prop them up a little bit and just let them know how much they're appreciated for what they're trying to do in these extremely trying times.
There are 149 public school districts across the state, and Holbeck says that they all have to do what's best for their schools and communities.
While Brookings, Sioux Falls, Mitchell, and Huron have passed mask mandates, and Rapid City is considering one, Governor Kristi Noem still calls it making a personal choice. Governor Noem says out of 41 states that have mask mandates, 39 of them are still seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases.
Some have said that my refusal to mandate masks is the reason why our cases are rising here in the state of South Dakota, and that is not true.
The South Dakota State Medical Association has called for a statewide mask mandate to stop the spread of COVID-19. Governor Noem disputes COVID-19 trackers that show South Dakota is among the highest number of cases per capita in the nation. According to Johns Hopkins, the 7-day average positivity rate for South Dakota is 56.3%.
Well, if someone in your house tests positive for COVID-19, you may not need to leave home to get tested yourself. This week, the state will start offering saliva tests for close contacts who live in the same household. The state will give you a code so you can go online and order your test. When it arrives in the mail, you set up a Zoom call, take the test, and mail it in. South Dakota Secretary of Health says that you should have the results within 24 hours. Numerous companies have announced promising preliminary results of their COVID-19 vaccine studies. However, a Sioux Falls doctor says people still need to practice mitigating strategies when the vaccine is first released because not everyone will receive the vaccination right away.
The problem is that we're not going to have widespread vaccine available into the broad population for a number of months. We may have some vaccine by the end of the year.
To learn what other circumstances surround a COVID-19 vaccine, just head to this KELOland.com original report.
Oh, let's turn to weather where there are some good news and things to celebrate, Adam. It is
gorgeous day. Now let's look at what's going to be happening tomorrow. Temperatures in the 30s. It's not a lot cooler than it is right now, and going into afternoon.
I think it's entirely in keeping with his psychology and what we would expect of somebody like him in these dire circumstances. We have to remember that Donald has never been in a situation he couldn't cheat, lie, steal, or buy his way out of. And the fact of the matter is, he has done the worst possible thing he could do. He has lost. He lost decisively. So there's all this cognitive dissonance going on for him because on the one hand, he knows deep down that it is impossible for him to lose ever. And on the other hand, there's plenty of objective evidence to suggest that he actually did lose. So all of these maneuverings, he's just ricocheting back from from one roadblock to the next, trying to find a way out or through, and it's just not going to happen. So we're going to see increasing levels of desperation, particularly if nobody in Republican leadership does anything to rein him in.
It doesn't look like anyone is going to do anything to rein him in. They're still afraid of him. But this is what I have to ask you. He continues, and it's going off of what you just said, he continues to publicly claim that he won the election. Do you believe that he really believes that, or is he's just pulling another grift here to get people, well, he's got to fight, so people think he's a fighter. He's got to pay off campaign debts, and so on. What do you think?
As is often the case with Donald, I think both things can be true on some level at the same time. He gaslights himself, which is kind of a fascinating thing. You know, he understands what the truth is, but he lies about it to such a degree that it's not just other people he starts convincing. Plus, as I said, he's being so enabled. People are giving him hope with these frivolous lawsuits, and by still listening to him and by blocking the Biden administration at every turn. So I think, again, that's why his behavior is so desperate. And, you know, we have to remember, it's not just that he's trying to grapple with the fact that he lost, or at least trying to get beyond that to a future in which he's somehow retaining power. He's also facing potential prosecution, because as soon as January 20th rolls around, he won't have the power of the Oval Office protecting him anymore. So he's even more tied into this idea that it can't possibly be the case that he lost.
Do you believe, though, Mary, that he's trying to sabotage the incoming administration and poison his supporters' minds so that they will never accept Joe Biden as president?
Yeah, I do. And it's not for any overarching purpose. Donald does not strategize. I believe other people around him are coming up with strategies to either give him a chance in 2024 or to get as much as they can out of his remaining few days in power. But Donald himself is just vengeful. It is
who he is, and he can't help himself. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely.
Wow. Wow. So it's not at this point, one would think that, Mary, it would be about the country at this point, or most people who are in that position or in that office would say, well, this is bigger than me. This is about the country. The country needs to come together. And when you think about this, Mary, any other person who's in this position would say, although I'm disappointed, or we are disappointed with the results, it doesn't appear, although we're disappointed with the results, it's time for the country to come together. And it's time for us to stop the recounts and all these things. And Joe Biden is going to be the president, and I hope that you'll get behind him. Isn't that what most people would do in this position, but he can't?
Of course. But he's not most people. He's worse than most people. He's damaged in a way most people are not damaged. Because, you know, it's not just the fact that undermining the incoming administration is bad for our democracy, or making people doubt the legitimacy of the election is dangerous to our system. It's that by dragging his feet, by being such a sore loser, he is continuing to put American lives in danger every day. It's despicable, it's criminal, and the Republicans need to be held accountable just as much as Donald does at this point.
So it's interesting that we haven't really seen him except for things that he's had to do, right? He's canceling his Thanksgiving trip. Do you think that there's a degree of shame or some reason that he is afraid or ashamed to show it, to be in public, because he cannot create his own reality right now?
One thing we need to understand is that the thing Donald is feeling most right now is terror. That's not something that he can acknowledge, so we're seeing that translate into rage. That he can handle. However, as I said earlier, he cannot change the circumstances. He lost. Losing in my family was the worst possible thing you can do, and it was punished severely. So there is a lot of shame. And the other thing is, Donald's a coward. He cannot brazen his way through this the way he's brazened himself through other things in the past. There's literally nobody who can get him out of this jam he's in. So to show up in public, even in a friendly space like Mar-a-Lago, is to suffer the indignity of being around people who know he's lost and are going to try to soothe his, soothe him or comfort him in some way, which would be another way of feeling like a loser. So he's going to stay in his bunker as long as he possibly can, or until he's figured out some solution to this problem, which is extraordinarily unlikely at this point. Although, the stuff about Iran is very troubling. The drawdown of troops in very sensitive regions is very troubling. So we need to be on our guard.
When I hear the excuses from, personally from people who are, trying to explain to me why the president is doing what he's doing, and I just sit there and I'm like, I can't even believe the text or my ear when they're telling me. It just sounds delusional. It's like a break from reality. Do you have a similar experience? What?
I do, and it's really disturbing to see how many people are willing to believe something that is so patently false. And it's not just a couple of people here and there. We're talking about a lot of people in higher echelons of government who are either being opportunistically mendacious by repeating a lie in the hopes that they're going to convince other people it's true, or who are so desperate for various reasons to keep Donald in power that they really do believe that this isn't happening. I'm not entirely sure how to explain it, but it's just another instance in which it shows that we as a country have a lot of work to do going forward.
A whole lot of work. I have to ask you about the coronavirus pandemic. We're in a crisis right now. More than 250,000 Americans are dead on his watch. Do you think the president understands or cares about that at all?
He understands it. He does not care. Let's put it in really bleak terms. He lost an election decisively. He feels rejected by the American people. He will sacrifice any of us to assuage his own, wounded ego. So, and that includes people who support him and vote for him. If we look at the maps right now, it's the reddest of red states that are suffering the most horrifically. He doesn't care. And every second he drags his feet and makes it impossible for the Biden administration to do the job that Donald himself has absolutely no interest in doing. He's directly responsible for the deaths of thousands of Americans. He's got blood on his hands, and he needs to be held to account. So I hope President-elect Biden keeps that in mind come January.
Mary, thank you.
Thank you so much, Don.
Now I want to turn to the president's
50s, but boy, it's going to be a nice day. And tomorrow night, you might have seen it could be a little passing shower northeastern South Dakota tomorrow.
We did get to 61 though for a high temperature today. That is 20 degrees above average for this time of year. Not to be out.
Suicide, alcoholism, and so on. If you go to the CDC site and you ask a simple question at that site, how many people died uniquely of COVID, you'll find a number less than 20,000. The fact is, high-risk people need to be protected, but people who are generally young and healthy absolutely should be, their behavior should be allowed to be different, especially if they're not in contact with older or sick individuals. And we have not done that. And until we do that, we're not handling the pandemic with a scalpel. We're handling it really with an axe.
Well, we get new information that's very helpful all the time as we all try to assess risk and make good decisions. Congressman now, again, Congressman-elect Darrell Issa, good to see you.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to be back.
Okay, tomorrow morning on America's Newsroom, don't miss the chairman of the Independent Voter Project, Dan.
To put their names out there, Brian. Scott Reed, one of the biggest Republican strategists out there, who ran Bob Dole 96, was the longtime strategist for the Chamber of Commerce, who's really plugged in with Leader McConnell's whole political orbit, the biggest donors in the country. He told the Post tonight, his words, this is a clown car that Giuliani's running. Bannon's being aggressive but doesn't have a plan. He thinks this whole push to call it voter fraud and that the election's rigged and now trying to make a triple bank shot to the Electoral College doesn't have coherence. So Scott Reed speaking out, others on Capitol Hill are privately speaking out. You heard John Cornyn's comments, the Texas senator. They want to return to normal. They want some kind of change here. They're not going to have a public brawl with a president who's sitting there at 1600, stewing about, not really sure how to concede, if he ever will concede as he thinks about his brand. But this is a Republican Party, believe me, based on my conversations all day today. They're ready to move on. They're not ready to rebuke him, but they're ready to move on.
Anita, this is a president, I'm reminded, who arrived in Erie, PA, days from the election and promptly told the audience in Erie that he never would have come back to Erie, PA, did he not need that area geographically for the electoral map. Whatever happened to that reporting that this was going to be Woodstocky, endless summer, that he was just going to go back out on the road and do rallies, or did the thought of 130 Secret Service agents in quarantine and spikes in coronavirus in all the states he would want to visit get the better of him?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons for that, and you didn't mention one of the other reasons, which is it takes a lot of money to go out on the road and put on these massive rallies that people talked about. There are people close to him that are urging him to do that he should not leave the White House unless he gets back out on the road for these rallies. You know, there have been a number of times that we've heard that he was supposed to go to Mar-a-Lago, his place down in South Florida, and pretty much every week we've been hearing for the last couple of weeks, every weekend he was going to go. You know, he was scheduled to go for Thanksgiving. You saw him cancel that. What people are telling him to do is, look, if you want to look like you're fighting this election, you want to look serious, you can't go down to South Florida and party. You need to stay at the White House and look like you're hunkering down and fighting this thing. So you see him there. You're not seeing the rallies, I think in part because these lawsuits and recounts are quite expensive. You saw in Wisconsin, you mentioned, you know, it cost $3 million for them to ask for a recount just in 2 counties. Had they done the entire state, it would have been, you know, about $8 or $9 million. So, you know, there's some concerns about that, but they're basically saying, people are telling him, stay at the White House, you know, look like you're fighting this. Now, there are some people that say, look, he should come out and talk about things that are happening, these changes he's making, policies he's pushing, and the coronavirus, and we just haven't seen him do that.
Hey, Aaron, I need 45 seconds of brilliance. What about the Democrats trying to combat what's happening right now as a form of voter suppression?
Well, listen, Joe Biden's lead is approaching 80 million votes in this country and climbing. They're still counting votes in California and New York, according to my former employer, the Associated Press. And voter turnout in this election, 65%, which is a rate that we have not seen since Madam Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's sorority was incorporated. And you can look up that year if you are interested to know as a little bit of trivia.
All right. Aaron, some other broadcast will get into the definition of skiwi. But thank you for tonight and for always. Aaron Haynes, Anita Kumar, Robert Costa, our big 3 to start us off tonight. Greatly appreciate it, gang. Thank you.
Care.
What if you had the chance to win a candy factory in real life? One South Dakota family might find it out. David Klein, the founder of Jelly Belly, is holding a real-life golden ticket scavenger hunt for a chance to win a candy factory. Once the clue came out on Saturday, it only took Sheila Brown and her family about 45 minutes to crack the code. And then they set their sights on Sisseton. Turns out they weren't alone when they got there. More than a dozen people were already searching. Now, there was a rumor that the ticket had already been found in the area, but they decided to keep looking anyway.
So the kids were playing on this Army tank. We had young ones running around, and we just started searching, and it ended up being in one of the very first spots we looked at when we got there. So we didn't find it for like an hour and a half later, so anybody could have found it, and it was luck.
This whole search was a family affair. They even had people bound for Belle Fourche. Brown said cracking the code might have actually been more fun than finding the ticket, but they are keeping their eyes on the prize.
Of course, we hope we win. We'll just have to see, I guess, where the story takes us. I'm not sure about running a candy factory, but it'd be pretty awesome.
There are still golden ticket searches going on in more than a dozen states right now. Once that is complete, the contest will then move to a nationwide search.
Lots of fun.
Next in
With the
sports,
first pick in
the
the
Minnesota
2020
Timberwolves had the #1 pick in tonight's NBA draft. See and hear from their top pick after the break.
Keep your eyes on the monster Angus.
This is a drafted stash and a guy who I really like his long-term potential. 6'7" playmaker. He can play on the ball.
Belgium takes the 2-1 lead. Let's skip ahead to the 69th minute.
Pedersen is having to make adjustments.
This year, I'm just going to open up to private groups, small groups, by appointment, and they're responsible for their own conduct, and certainly they're well aware that masks is a necessity.
He wants to keep the Christmas spirit alive, especially during these unprecedented times.
As people gather together and begin to sing all of a sudden you develop a real tightness and a sense of community in this little place. And I see a lot of tears. In fact, it touches a lot of people's hearts. So my joy is to try to give the gift that keeps on giving as long as I'm able.
Karen Croteville is Pedersen's cousin. She was coming to Nora's store long before Mike started the tradition.
Growing up just a mile and a half from here, we walked by here when we walked to Nora's school, or not our school up the hill, but it was a pretty place because they had some groceries. And I recall that in the center here they had a big stand that had bread on and rolls and things like that, and all the canned goods were along the back here.
She's continued to come here over the years to take part in the holiday tradition.
I bring all kinds of people here from my family, my grandkids, and tell everybody about, have you been to Nora for Christmas? You have to go to Nora for Christmas.
She says even though this year will look different, she encourages people to consider coming out in small groups.
Bring some of your family, some of your cousins, a couple of your neighbors, whatever it might be. And it still is possible to come because it's very important. To me, it's like Christmas isn't Christmas until we've been to Nora.
When I started 30 years ago, they were little kids. Now they're married and bringing their children, so there's a tradition there.
And while he knows this year's tradition will be different, he looks forward to making the most of it this holiday season.
I think the thing that we most missed here this year is a sense of community. I mean, you come in here as total strangers, people, and like one lady, she says, you come in as a stranger and you go away as a friend. I mean, we meet people, so that the camaraderie is going to be will be a missed thing. But, it is what it is, and life goes on, and you have to make the best of it.
With Eye on KELOland, I'm Sarah McDonald.
Pedersen says that on November 27th, there will be a one-night open house at Laurel Ridge Barn for singing. It is free and open to the public. Donations are accepted, and if you'd like to schedule reservations at Nora's store, we provided that information under this story on KELOland.com.
The USD men's basketball team begins its
NBA draft. The Minnesota Timberwolves select Anthony Edwards from the University of Georgia.
Okay, that's not the guy who played Goose in Top Gun. The Wolves thinking they found their backcourt complement to D'Angelo Russell by drafting the Georgia shooting guard Edwards. In his only season, he was the SEC Freshman of the Year who averaged 19 points per game for the Bulldogs. Some thought the Wolves would take LaMelo Ball, who ended up going number 3 to Charlotte. Timberwolves instead opting to go with the scoring and defensive specialist who thinks he'll fit in perfectly with Towns and Russell.
I got two superstars alongside of me, so I'm not really going to feel too much pressure. But I'm going to do what I always do, bring what I bring to the table, and just impact the game other ways. Like, they already can score the ball, so defensively I'm going to impact the game. Being the guard, the best guard rebounder on the team that I can possibly be.
Minnesota was busy in the latter half of the first round as well. They had the number 17 overall pick, but flipped it to Oklahoma City in exchange for Ricky Rubio on the 25th and 28th pick. Now, Rubio was the Wolves' 5th overall pick in 2009 and spent his first 6 years in Minnesota. Since leaving, he's averaged about 13 points and 8 assists per game. Now, Minnesota sent that number 25 pick to New York in exchange for the 23rd pick. If we can pull up that graphic, which would be Argentine guard Leandro Bolmero. The 28th pick, they took Washington forward Jaden McDaniels. And with their only second-round pick, they stayed as close to home as possible with Gopher center Daniel Oturu. Now, closer to our home, the University of South Dakota men's basketball team is scheduled to open their season a week from today against Colorado at the Little Apple Classic in Manhattan, Kansas. And perhaps when the team's doing its introduction song, it should be the Who's Who Are You? That's because after graduating 5 key contributors, Stanley Amude and Ty Chisholm are the only seniors. Beyond that, other holdovers from last year saw little to no play.
Uncomfortable. What do you make of his assessment of that?
Well, zero margin for failure. We really have to get this right. So, Doctor, take states like Mississippi, Arkansas, take states like...
So they're about a quarter the size of the United States. So if you do the math and multiply 13,000 by 4, you can see that if the U.S. had had a similar response as Germany did.
They also believe that if you're white, that you should, in other words, denounce who you really are, because these are bigots. Black liberation theology is filled with bigotry.
That are expressing these extreme concerns that they won't have the resources and the distribution mechanisms. It's one thing to manufacture the vaccine, and by the way, at least one of the two vaccines needs extreme low temperatures, and everything has to be transported.
All of the names of the people who have died in the United States from coronavirus, it would take about 10 days. That's the magnitude of the loss. 10 days, 24 hours a day to read all the names of the people who died, all the people we've lost.
Schools are closing. I'm sure you've heard here in New York City because...
Say there was so much backlash to people talking about her faith, and yet they now feel like Reverend Warnock's faith is under attack and it's fair game.
Well, very, very quickly, it's always unfair. It's the height of hypocrisy. We saw it not just with her, but we saw it with anyone that has conservative values as myself and as others. And we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that black and white together unite and make sure Mr. Warnock never dawns our Senate. He is a disgrace.
What it's going to be like when, I don't know if it's going to be the Iowa Ready Reserve and National Guard arriving in Sioux City, setting up inoculation centers, setting up tents, freezers required, the paperwork. Can you see this happening in the next 2 months? Is your city ready to stand up that kind of organization overnight?
Well, we have excellent guard units in our community. I know they'll rise to the occasion. We have a emergency management team that's in place that'll rise to the occasion. I will tell you this, we'll do whatever we can. We've responded to floods in the past. We've responded to tornadoes. We'll do what we have to do to get it done.
And